This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, great. So anyone, any questions, guys, before I get started from the yesterday's session? So yesterday we were mostly talking about what do you mean by an availability set and how do you create an availability set? What are fault and what are update domains and how Microsoft goes ahead uses that particular logic to group your virtual machines. And we are doing all these things for something known as high availability, for something known as, let's say, high availability out here. Yes, any questions still here? Anyone, any questions still here that I can take before we move forward with today's class? Anyone, any questions? Anyone, any questions out here? Okay, so let's review the infrastructure firstly that we created yesterday, and let's go ahead and start with today's demo. And as I said yesterday, today we'll be mostly dealing with something called as a load balancer and how to, let's say, use a load balancer. What are the uses of load balancer and all these things out. So let's go there and let's understand a couple of things. Firstly, I'm inside the resource group that we have created yesterday, and in the resource group I'll just come here, click on group by type, and this will make sure to give me all the resources in the form of a grouping. So I have an availability set that got created the very first, and if I open this particular availability set and if I go into the virtual machines section of the availability set out here, I have I have three VMs that are running out of this particular availability set of different on different fault and update domain combinations. So VM1 is running on a fault domain called 0, update domain called 1. VM2 is running on a fault domain 1 and update domain 1, and finally we have let's say VM3, which is fault 0 and update 0 out here. So Microsoft has gone ahead and placed that strategically, understanding which underlying server is free, and then went ahead and created your virtual machine into the availability set out here. And apart from this, let's go back into our resource group and let's check the resource group once again. Apart from the availability set, I have three disks, three OS disks, one for each and every virtual machine, three network interface cards, three network security group rules, three public IP addresses, one for one particular virtual machine. So that's the reason I'm writing IP1, IP2, and IP3. And then finally, if I just scroll down, I have the virtual machines themselves, VM1, VM2, and VM3. And I have a simple virtual network, meaning a single virtual network, inside which I just had one subnet. And inside that particular subnet, I have three different virtual machines that are attached at 10.0.0.4, 5, and 6. So these are the three addresses that are attached out here in, let's say, the three planes out there. And I have all these things that are created out here. Yes, any questions still here with the infrastructure and how did we create it and all these things out here? Anyone, any questions before I move forward?
Hi, sir.
Hi, sir.
Sir, as you said before,
Mm-hmm.
3 VM before, there is a load balancer is there. These three
Correct.
load balancer, it's act as a only one IP address, right?
With three virtual machines, no, it's not three load balancers. It's just one load balancer.
Okay.
It's just one load balancer. You don't have to have three load balancers. And this load balancer will have its own IP address. Just one IP
Okay.
address,
Okay.
which will start diverting traffic VM1, VM2, and VM3. So you don't have to have three load balancers out here. It's just one load balancer, any number of VMs that are sitting in your availability set out here.
But here only one IP is available, right?
Only one IP should be available. Yes, correct.
So on that time, any VM, that means the service goes down. So the VM is not available. Any of IP 1 or IP 2 or IP 3. I don't know.
Okay.
So on that time, how can I find out which IP is goes down?
No, it's not IP that goes down. It's VM that
VM is
goes
goes
down.
down.
I'll remove
Yeah.
this. I'll remove this IP addresses. I'll comfortably remove this IP addresses.
Okay.
And when you go inside your load balancer, that's what I was telling. When I go inside the load balancer does a continuous monitoring of all your virtual machines, and your load balancer will tell you which machine is going down and how can you, let's say, fix the issues that are there in that particular machine out there.
How can we
So
know, sir?
that's what I'm telling you. I have to tell you when I configure the load balancer. When we configure the load balancer, I can tell you how the pool goes down and how you can identify that. How can you know? Alerting, monitoring, these concepts that can come later, which will tell you explicitly that you know what a VM1 is going down, or VM2 is going down, or VM3 is going down, and so on and so forth. So I have to first configure a load balancer to tell you which one is going down and why is it going down.
Okay. If any VM is goes down, but IP is still there still, right?
Again, if I'm removing the IP, then, or when you say the IP is still there, which IP that you're talking about? Is it the load balancer's IP
Load
or is it the
balancer
VM
IP.
IP? Load
Yeah.
balancer IP is still there. If one VM goes down, load balancer will shift your traffic to the VM2 or VM3 or whichever VM is available.
Okay.
So to understand that, that's what I was telling. To understand that, I have to first go into the topic of load balancing. If someone else
Okay.
had a question, go ahead, please.
Uh, in three virtual machines, there is a single content different from.
In three virtual machine, no, it's single content that I'm
Then,
doing because
mm, then if it shift if load balance will shift the second mission, then how will you get the exact output?
sorry, how will you get, sorry?
If load balance our data is there in virtual machine one, then it shift server go down, then it shift to load virtual machine two.
hmm
Then how will we get the exact data?
Each and every virtual machine here, VM1, VM2, VM3, each and every virtual machine here will have the same data called irctc.co.in or a simple HTML page. All three virtual machines will be hosting this particular website. So whichever you go into, that's what I was telling yesterday, is that this will have the same data, this will have the same data, this will have also the same data. Whichever machine you go into will have an identical set of data that you will be, let's say, placing out there to make sure that these three machines are just nothing but copy of each other.
Okay.
These are copies. So load balancer,
Okay.
if it if it shifts to something else, or if it shifts to virtual machine 2 or virtual machine 3, as a user you will get the same content out here. Yes, and go ahead, please. Is any more questions here? Okay, so what I'll do, in order to, or before I go into something called load balancing, let me go ahead and configure something called as IIS on all the three machines. So here, here, and here as well. There's Internet Information Services. So let me go ahead, configure all these things, three things out here. So what I'll do is I'll just go back into my virtual machine one. I'll take the IP of the virtual machine one, and I'll say, sorry, I will use something called RDP. So I'll say remote desktop, open this out, paste the IP that I have. I'll just copy this out once again, paste the IP that I do have. I'll say this is test user, and whichever password that I have given to this, and I'll go ahead, enter my password out here, and I'll go ahead and I'll log into this particular machine, which is a demo VM1, which is a Windows Server 2019 and I want to convert this into a web server right now. So what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and add that particular rule called web server IIS. And once I add that rule, I'll just go ahead into that particular root folder. Instead of deploying an entire code, I'll just place a simple HTML page for my demo out here. So I'll just go there. I'll say add rules and features. And once inside this page, I'll say next. Installation type is role-based installation. Server selection, I'll select this particular server. I'll just scroll down and I'll say this is web server IIS. It's the management console, and I'll say add this feature. I'll say next, 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 and next, and finally install this out. So I'm logging into this particular machine, installing the IIS feature on the VM1, and and I'll do the same thing for VM2 and VM3. Whatever I'm doing for VM1, I'll do the same thing for VM2 and VM3, and I'll place a very simple HTML document out here. So whatever HTML document that I have here, I'll place the same HTML document in VM2, and I'll place the same HTML document in VM3 to make sure that each and every VM is identical copy of each other. Like I'm just cloning these VMs out here, and then later I'll get something known as a load balancer out here, and etc. So let me go inside this VM, and once this installation is done, it will take around a minute. And once this installation is done, it should give me a simple IIS, let's say, folder, meaning it should give me a www root folder, and Microsoft by default is going to give me a simple HTML page out here, and I'll go ahead and add my own HTML page as such out there. So let's wait for this particular installation to be done. And while this installation is going on, and let's see, yes, this is done. It says installation of the feature is successful. Let's close this out, and let's go back into that particular, let's say, C drive. And inside this particular C drive, there is something called inetpub, which is an internet publishing folder, inside which I have a root. Inside that, I have some IIS start.html, which means that you as a user, if you just copy this out and go into your browser and say enter, you would have this particular simple HTML page out here. Now, in order for my demo, I have 3 VMs, and I need to understand when I place a load balancer, which VM will actually respond. In order to do that, I'll place some custom content here. So what I'll do is I'll just do a control R inside the VM, open up a notepad file, and in this notepad file, I'll just type a very simple HTML code. Again, how do I type it? Just say h1 in brackets, and I'll say this is server, and just give a simple content called demo vm1, and then close this particular, let's say, HTML page. So this is the heading of the HTML page. This is the ending of the HTML. Between these two, beginning and ending, I'm just going ahead and placing my own content out here. I'm just saying this is server demo vm1 for me to identify which server is actually responding back. So I'll just save this as, I'll save as, and I'll just go ahead into the folder called www root, and I'll just say all files, and I'll save this file in quotes. I'm saying it is default.html. I'm just saving this file as default.html out here. I'll just say save. So what this will do is that this will now give me a new page called default.html, which means that if I'm a user coming from this particular browser, going to that particular IP, and if I do a forward slash, and I'll say default.html, I'll just get this content telling that this is server demo vm1 exclamation. So I'm just using a very simple page out here that is placed inside the server. So initially I went ahead and let's go there. I went ahead and initially I created the VM, and after creating the VM, I'm doing an RDP session here, installing the IIS, And once installed, I'm going into www root folder, and inside this particular root folder, I'm placing my own HTML page called default.html with a simple content out here. In h1 brackets, I just went and give a simple content. And when I go into that particular, let's say, IP and do a /default.html, I am just getting a simple line telling that, okay, fine, this particular content is coming from, let's say, the virtual machine one out here. So, is any questions till here that I can take on what are we doing and all these things? Any questions that I can take till here? If the HTML page is a payment page which is connected, how the connection will happen, sir, in that case? Again, the connection here is going to be mentioned inside your HTML page out here. Again, as a developer, that is something that the development team has to take care of it. There is something called redirections, there is something called connection strings and all these things out here. So you can have a backend database which it connects to and all these things, and inside your HTML you can go ahead, mention something called as a link to that particular page, and whenever the user clicks on something called payment, he's redirected to, let's say, a different server out there as such, and both the servers can talk to each other. Again, uh, I'm not going to advanced development, I'm just going in and showing a very simple HTML page out here for us to understand from an infrastructure perspective. But yes, inside your HTML page you can have multiple redirect links that a user can click and go into multiple servers and get multiple contents out here and all these things out here. Yes, any more questions here? Anyone, any questions here? Okay, so the similar setup is something that I have to do on VM2 and VM3 as well. So if I come down into my if I come down into my resource group, I just did the same setup for VM1, just the first virtual machine. Now I have to go inside the second VM. Again, I can just close this out. I'll have to go inside the second VM. This is also running state. I'll have to copy the IP address of the second VM. I'll again have to go in. I'll again have to go inside my second VM, install the IIS, install or put a HTML page and all these things. Just a second. Yes. Anyone? Any questions? Sorry, if I can take. Okay. So I'll have to do this for the VM2, and I'll have to also repeat the same procedure for the VM3 as well. So if I go into the resource group, if I go into the resource group out here, I'll have to repeat the same procedure for VM2 and VM3 as well, which is very manual in nature because I have to go into each and every VM, do an RDP session out there. Again, if you don't have a public IP, it will make things even more worse. You cannot even do an RDP out here by directly, let's say, establishing some connection. So what Azure really does out here is that, give me a second. Yes, please stay on mute if you are not talking. Thank you. And if you look at, let's say, Azure's options out here to go ahead and install the IIS and let's say go ahead keep an HTML page out here, it's pretty simple. There is, if you just scroll down, there is something called as a run command inside the demo VM, and if you click on this one, there is something called. So what you can do is that without actually going ahead and establishing an RDP session, meaning without actually going inside the virtual machine, you can run a very simple HTML script and have all your IIS, all your, let's say, HTML page, let's say, executed out there. For which, if I have to look into a script, let's see if I have one with me handy. So if I want to look into a script, it's a simple 3-line script which just says import a module called server manager, meaning you manually going in and clicking on server manager. Instead of that, I'm saying import a module called server manager, install Windows feature name called web server, IIS, and then there's something called set content. Path here is the inetpub folder default.html. Value, this is the server, whatever is the name of your server. The environment.computer name out here is a predefined variable in PowerShell. So if I just go ahead into my own local machine and just put in that particular command called environment.computer name, just give me whatever is the name of my local laptop. So whatever is the name of your virtual machine will get displayed here just take these 3 lines, just go into your VM, which is VM2 and VM3, paste the script. Again, if I want to, let's say, execute both of them parallelly, I'll go to VM2, I'll go to VM3, just place the script out here. And so go into run command. There's something called run command out here. Go into run command, paste the script out here as a local partial, and then hit the run button on both the machines. So what you can do is that instead of, let's say, going into the VM, logging into it, and doing a lot of things out here, you can just go ahead, put these 3 lines out here, execute this out, and it's done. It'll start running and it'll go ahead, install this out. And this is something that I did before I started the class. Because of the best interest of time, I did not want to go ahead, execute this out again and again. So for example, if I go ahead, take the IP of VM2 and VM3, this is the VM1, that's saying VM1 out here, and I have a VM2. So if I copy this out, paste it out here, and I say default.html, I'm telling this is server demo VM2. And if I go ahead with VM3 and paste this content out here and say default.html, and this is server demo VM3. We have 3 machines, VM1, VM2, and VM3, which are running parallelly with almost the same content. Meaning I'm putting the same content out here. The only thing that I changed is the name of the VM so that we know which VM is actually responding. And there are three different public IPs that are assigned to each and every VM out here. Now what I want to do is I don't want to, let's say, create so many public IPs out here, because I know that at a later point in time, if I introduce something called as a load balancing, I'll have one IP and I can give you as a user that particular IP out here. So what I can do is now VM1 has IP1, VM2 has IP2, VM3 has IP3. I want to disassociate these VMs from a public IP. I don't want a public IP at all. So what I'll do is I'll go inside the resource group and go into the NIC cards of each and every VM. So if I just group this by type again, I have the NIC card of each and every VM out here. So I can open this out, and open this out. So I've opened 3 different NIC cards for demo VM1 respectively, which is attached to demo VM1, 2, and 3. I'll go into the IP configuration and go into the primary IP out here and disassociate the public IPs. I don't even need the public IP at all. So again, this is for the VM2 IP configuration. And since all the IPs are attached to, let's say, the NIC card of a particular virtual machine, I'm going ahead and disassociating this one. And the same thing for VM, or the same thing for the NIC card 3 as well. So disassociating this one. So just to, let's say, follow along, in order to repeat these steps, I ran a PowerShell script on VM2 and VM3, which installs the IIS and also goes ahead and creates a default.html page. So IIS installation is being done, and also you have a default.html page that's being installed, or that's being, let's say, put in place. So both of them are being done using a PowerShell script. And E is that I know that I will later get something called as a load balancer in place, and and that's the reason I don't want a IP1, IP2, and IP3. It's waste of money. So what I'll do is I'm going inside the NIC card of each and every VM and disassociating the IP addresses. So after I disassociate the IP address, all the VMs, if you look at this, this is done. Each each and every VM will not have a public IP address. They will only start to have a private IP address out here. So if I just close this and just close this and just close this, if I just go into my VMs, every VM out here has no public IP address at all. So if I go here, click on this one, nothing will load because your public IP is disassociated. So each and every VM that you look at will not have a public IP address. So no public IP that is assigned to any VM out here. There is only a private IP assignment, which I won't be able to remove. Reason being, this private IP is coming directly from the subnet inside which the VM is hosted out here. So no public IPs, and this is where I will now go ahead and introduce a concept called load balancing in Azure. So load balancer Azure. Let's go here, and this is the documentation on what really a load balancer is, how exactly a load balancer kind of works out, and how do you have, let's say, what is internal load balancing and all these things out. So I'll just go ahead send this particular link across to you all so that you can do some reading on this one. This is a very important concept out here. And let me go into the Azure portal and search for something called as load balancer. So as and when I do a load balancer, I have something called load balancers out here. I click on this and I'll say create a new load balancer. So this is what I'm now creating. I did not attach all these things out, which I need to also tell how do I attach and how does the load balancing really work out here, and etc. Again, both the load balancer and the virtual machines needs to be in the same region. Your load balancer cannot be in a different region and the virtual machines cannot be in a different regions out there. Both the VM and the load balancer, they have to, let's say, stick to the same region. They have to be in the same region out there. So what I'll do is I'll just go here and I'll create a resource group, not a problem. This can be something like load balancing RG or something like this. In here, I'll give a name to the load balancer, telling this is a demo load balancer, something like this, some demo load balancer out here, good enough. I'll say that the load balancer is in a region called ECS2, and I'll go for something called as a standard load balancing solution. We'll talk about what a gateway is. There's something called application gateway, which I need to talk about, but a basic load balancer gives you a lesser SLA. It's a simple, let's say, load balancer out here, which is used for, let's say, very lighter workloads, which has a lot of limitations. We generally don't go for basic. We generally don't go ahead and create a basic load balancer out here. So I'm just sticking with a standard SKU, just, just scrolling down, and I'll say that the type of the load balancer is a public load balancer because I need to expose this particular load balancer to all my users, like you, who's going ahead and trying to, let's say, book a ticket with my, let's say, website or something like that, or do something with my application. So I need to expose this particular load balancer to the entire world, for which I'm telling that the load balancer is a public load balancer. And this is now a regional load balancer that I'm trying to create, meaning it's a region specific load balancer. I want to balance the machines that are, let's say, running in one particular or one specific region out there. So in the very first page, I'm selecting what is my subscription, what is the resource group, name of the load balancer, location of the load balancer, the type of the load balancer that I need to go for, sorry, the SKU of the load balancer, and then the type, which is public or internal. I say this is public. And then I have something called regional and global. I'm saying this is a regional load balancer out here. And finally, I'll say next, and I'll go into something called as a front-end IP configuration. So this is the IP address that is used for the inbound and outbound communications within the load balancing, meaning this is the IP address that a load balancer gets, and this is the IP address that you will give to your end user.